All right.
All right. So welcome back to my channel. Today we have a special guest artist that I'm really excited to talk to, Patricio Apaez. I had the privilege of performing with him at Carnegie Hall a few years ago, and he's an incredible pianist who just gave his master degree recital. I'll post a link. Please check it out. So I wanted to kind of maybe start with that. Good morning, Patricio, or good afternoon for you, I guess.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Hello.
So, first of all, fantastic job on your recital. I really loved it. A couple of things about it
Appreciate it.
that I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on. Um, I really like the program that you picked because I think a lot of times artists get kind of stuck in the standard repertoire, and they kind of forget about Medtner and some of these lesser known composers. Uh,
Definitely.
yeah, and so I really liked your choice of pieces. What's the thought process behind how you program recitals?
Well, definitely so far it has been a lot of it input from my professors. Going through undergrad. I mean, high school even. I went to Interlochen Arts Academy, so I started seriously preparing to be a performer, and naturally all the input from the teachers is appreciated, like, oh, I think you should do some etudes, classical sonata, all of that. But since I started playing, I always had this interest of like little out of the beaten path composers, like you said, Metner. I've done some Alcan and Busoni, stuff like that, right? um, so beyond what my teacher suggests, um, I always suggested like, oh, how about I play some Granger, for example, or like Medner in this case, right? And they always, usually they're like, don't even know the piece, it's like, oh wow, that's an interesting. Who's it by? I'm like, oh well, Medner, famous Russian pianist composer. But yeah, I always just try to have something a little bit interesting that both audiences and like my professors wouldn't be so familiar with, but that I love.
Yeah.
So just to have that connection, I feel is important with the unusual repertoire, just something that you think you connect well with and can present in a convincing manner. um, how I came to that, it basically came from the influence of Marc Andre Amelin in my piano playing. Like I been a fan of his and listening to all his recordings of unknown composers. I just kind of got exposed to them and just made it my goal to just try to play some of this music as well. In the recital specifically, they'll hear some Medtner. I mean, Bach, Schubert, Chopin, which is the standard that you must have. Medtner, and an encore by Frederick Shevsky, who just recently passed away. And also Israeli composer pianist Ron Yedidia played one of his etudes. So yeah, just kind of try to have like a little variety, like I always have something standard, like Haydn or Beethoven and all of that. But alongside with it, I like to have something more unique and different for the audience. So that's more or less the process.
That's awesome. Are there any other composers that you might turn the audience on to that they might not be familiar with?
Yes, definitely. I mean, much of it is very difficult, so I'm working my way up to some of these big pieces by like Medtner or Godowski or people like that. But definitely also like Scriabin is kind of standard, but not all pianists know a lot of his pieces, like all the sonatas. So that's actually, now that I'm graduated with my master's, I kind of feel a little bit more free to pick and choose some of these things. So I kind of picked up the Scriabin Sonata number 6 as one of the next long-term projects, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah. So
the F sharp. The two movement, is that the
No, it's a one movement, and I'm not even sure it's like in a tonal center that clear yet. I'm still exploring. But yeah, that's one of the recent things going on. Sorry, what was the root of the question again?
Just are there some composers that you might
Oh yeah,
turn the
right.
audience on to just to listen?
So the Scriabin is like something I want to bring out more. Like I played the Ninth Sonata before, and
Yeah.
it's, I mean, it's known, but it's like mostly unfamiliar to many pianists, you know. So that I also really enjoyed, like I mentioned, the Ron Yedidia piano music. Interesting story is like I studied with him before my master's privately at the New York Piano Academy, and I had been a fan of his music like way before that. So coming to study with him was like such an incredible opportunity for me, and personally get input from him of his music. It's definitely an enriching experience working with a composer, you know. So quite a bit of his pieces are in my to-do list eventually. So that's one that I would really like to promote a little bit more in my playing. Like I said, Alcan is also one of my favorites. I played his smaller pieces, like the miniatures, esquisses. It's a set of like 40 pieces, I believe. It's kind of like a Mendelssohn's Song Without Words, kind of like a set like that.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. So those are a couple. There's plenty others, like Frederick Shevsky is like pretty known in the contemporary music world. Kapustin. And like one more obscure one out there is Nikolai Roslavets, which is like you should check out actually Marc-André Amelin's recording. There's like 5 sonatas, but the third and fourth are lost. So we know of the first and second, and then the fifth. And very difficult, very Scriabin-like late Scriabin, but definitely something on its own. You know.
You mentioned Hamelin. Man, that guy is so prolific. He I recently got introduced to Samuel Feinberg.
Yes,
that's his fourth sonata is insane, man. So Feinberg is another one that I want to eventually explore.
Look into. Yes, there's just definitely like all the sonatas are just incredible, and he recorded recently, as you probably know, the first 6, and it's like, you know, it's an interesting process, like going through a new Hamelin recording for me that is something I never heard of, because it's like, oh, you like part of it, and then you listen more, and then you like the next part more, and then when you listen to all of it carefully, you're like, wow, it's all great music, like great choices of repertoire he has.
Yeah, for sure. How do you go about starting a new piece? What's the process in preparing, especially a substantial piece like some of the Mettner pieces or something?
Yeah, sure. Well, it depends. Like if it's something I've never heard before, I approach it strictly, like carefully, just looking at all the score, trying different sounds, like reading through it a bunch of times. But if it's something I have somewhat been familiar with, like I just try to approach it in what I wanted to sound like already. I know, okay, I know this piece, I've heard many different interpretations, and I like it this way, you know. So I just kind of try to get to that point where it's like how I envision it, you know. For example, the sixth Scriabin sonata, I know very well. I've heard it like for years, and now actually looking at the score is just kind of like piecing the parts together, both physically at the keyboard and the theory and the harmonies and all of that. But the piece, like I know how it goes, like note by note, you know. It's just kind of like getting my body like to learn it, basically. But yeah, like something like the Yedidia Etude for my recital, for example,
Mhm.
that was a little bit different because it was literally learned off a copy of the manuscript that has like scratched out sections and like tiny details that like you really have to look closely, you know. So that was interesting. But luckily, I had Ron himself to help me out in some of the things that
That's
were not
awesome.
too. Yeah.
That's really cool.
So that was interesting experience for sure.
Yeah. Um, Another thing I liked about your recital, I'm working on the third ballade right now, Chopin's ballade. So it was really cool hearing you
Definitely.
play it. That's my favorite of the four,
Oh,
personally.
really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
I play the first and the third, and the
Uh-huh.
first, of course, is the famous one. But the third, I really liked how you, because it's really complex as far as the articulation goes. Like the part where it
Hmm.
turns into C sharp minor and it's all chromatic in the left hand, that part, that's my favorite part of the piece. But
Yeah.
there's like, some of the notes are accented with ties, some are staccato, some are legato, like very specific articulation. And you played it at just the right tempo to where you could hear that, and you could hear all the beautiful dissonances.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, it was really good, and you could actually hear the six beats. You can kind of lose the pulse with that piece, I think.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
how did you approach that piece? Just out of curiosity, because it's pretty complex.
Yes, it was for me too. I'm telling you, it's like probably no, might not be. Well, I think it was the most substantial piece in my repertoire in the
Uh-huh.
recital, besides like the Bach Second Partita and the Schubert Sonata, which are big pieces. But
Yeah.
in terms of like technically and emotionally, the Chopin Ballade was definitely up at the top there. Um, and you know, I have to give most of the credit for my interpretation to my professor in my master's degree at Brooklyn College, Jeffrey Beagle, because like you know, I learned it and I played how I thought, but those things that you mentioned exactly is like what he kind of guided me
Hmm.
into the right direction, which is like okay, the articulation, the pedaling, like
Yeah.
Chopin marks very specific pedaling, which it does have an effect,
Hmm.
like if you do it otherwise, you know. So giving attention to that and the articulations that you mentioned. I mean, Chopin is just very specific in some of the things that he writes, and not everybody does it exactly like that,
Hmm.
you know. But I found that if you follow it, all the notation in the score, you can experiment with that as it is. There's like room to play around. Like you said, the pulse definitely has to be consistent, you know, but still has the romantic freedom to kind of rubato and all of that. Um, but in general, I felt that like the character is what brings all those things out together, you know. So if you get a nice dance flow with the singing top lines and the inner voices clearly like marking the direction, it kind of came up together almost on its own once you get that feeling, you know.
Okay.
I mean, obviously beyond learning the piece and getting all the technical details, once you have that, you just have to kind of connect with the essence of the character, and it certainly helps knowing all these little things about the pulse
Yeah.
and other things. So yeah, it was a lot of guidance from my professor at the time
Hmm.
that kind of came it make it as it was, you know.
Okay. What are you working on right now? Now that your recital is done.
Yeah, so like I said, like for me, like I have been, you know, studying my undergrad and then a few years off taking private lessons.
Hmm.
So it was a lot of like my teacher's input or repertoire. So now finally I finished and I felt like, wow, I can pick my own pieces like completely, you know. So I kind of like visited back. Right now I'm visiting back two Rachmaninoff preludes, Opus 23,
Hmm.
number 5 in G minor, famous one, and
Hmm.
number 10. No, is it 10 or number 9? Number 10, I think. You know,
Okay.
let me see. E flat minor, the double notes one.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, number 10. Uh-huh. So those two are revisiting from. I learned them before. I performed the G minor, and I picked a new one, which is the number 4, the D major. So
Okay.
I'm planning to have those three as part of our recital. And I'm also learning two Haydn sonatas, which are two movement only. So one of which I've played before in G major is like a,
Okay.
and then a B flat major, which is the next one also in two movements. That's a brand new one. So I thought it would be a nice pairing, like three Rachmaninoff preludes, two short Haydn sonatas.
Yeah.
And somewhere in there, I'm gonna fit the sixth Scriabin sonata once I learned it.
Nice.
But yeah, so going a little bit back to the question about recitals, how to make a program. I kind of tend to have like a main focus point in the program, like a big piece that kind of is surrounded by like little smaller pieces and or put there in the middle, just to have like a build up to the program, and then like a climax with a big piece, and then a little bit bring it down from there.
Okay, that's a nice approach. Do you think it's difficult? Because I mean, obviously, there's a balance between bringing some new works to the audience, but then not having too much obscure works to make it accessible to the audience. Do you think it's difficult
Exactly.
to find the balance?
Well, I guess it depends in the situation, right? Like if you go to an audience that is like very knowledgeable and experienced with like much repertoire, you could do something like just completely off the beaten path, just to kind of stretch their imagination a little bit. And like I mentioned in the schooling scenario with degrees and all of that, you do have to have a balance, because you have the expectation of like play some Bach, some Beethoven, Chopin, and all of that. And like I said, I always look for the opportunity to put something special, different in there.
Yeah.
Not to put down any of the great repertoire, like I'm just as in love with it as the unknown things that I like. But yeah, I think that if it's an audience that is mostly familiar with the standard repertoire, you do have to have a good balance,
For sure. Can you talk a little bit about the like what it's like and what's involved in a music degree program? I think a lot of people are kind of curious about that, and so maybe we can talk about what's involved there.
Sure. Well, honestly, coming into it, I had no awareness of what it was going to be like. Like I mentioned, I had been at Interlochen for high school for 3 years, and so I really liked the experience there because they kind of prepare you a little bit in the whole mechanism of how it's going to be in college, kind of.
Yeah.
So you have your professor, you have your studio class, you have your degree recital or your high school recital and chamber, all of that. So it kind of helped me get prepared for my undergrad, which was in Ball State University in Indiana.
Okay.
And there it was tough because being at a university, it was not only music that I had to study, so I had like English, math, physics, all this academic curriculum. And on top of that, like all the music classes. So I kind of struggled a little bit in my degree, to the point that I ended up having to take a year off after my second year. Yes. So I took a year off and was kind of debating like, oh, am I going to be able to do this? Like it seemed like a lot. But during that year, I noticed, okay, so I definitely love piano. It's definitely what I need to do. And I just came back and finished it. So I heard similar stories from people that kind of have a hard time balancing academics with music in a degree, but definitely is doable. And it definitely gave me the opportunity, to kind of develop that discipline and just commitment to getting through it, which is needed for a master's degree, which I now completed also. And also just like the university system in the US is different from what I can anticipate if I had gone to college in Mexico, where I'm from originally. So yeah, it was like very eye-opening experience to how like the music world works later on after college, you know. So yeah, now my master's degree was in Brooklyn College in New York City, and unfortunately, like a little bit more than half of it was online due to COVID,
Yeah.
you know. But I just felt like, you know what, like let's just get through it and stick with it, make the best of it, and I did get the best I could out of it, I feel like.
Mhm.
And really grateful that I did get to spend at least part of it in the classroom, you know, with my classmates. That's another big part, just getting to know musicians that are as passionate as you are, and collaborating and having relationships for the future. It's a great part of it, mainly.
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely unique being online for school. Because I take part of my curriculum includes accompanying, and
Hmm.
that's pretty tricky, coordinating with singers and other
Oh
instrumentals.
man,
Like it's
yeah, 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 yeah.
thing this semester, so it's definitely I'm definitely looking forward to being back in person for a lot of that.
Certainly, yeah, yeah, yeah. So let me ask you: were you able to accompany somebody in real time online? No,
No, it
right?
was
Okay, yeah,
we tried it and it just didn't work. So we had to
yeah,
record separately and kind of put the recordings together, and that's kind of how we did it over the last
yeah, yeah, yeah.
semesters. So
You know, that was probably one of my most interesting experiences too, during the online school. Having to put together with a girl who was in Singapore, I was in Mexico, and our professor was here in New York. And what we just, as we learned the piece, we send each other recording of what we had, listen to it, try to play with it, and then in the lesson, we worked on the same way. And eventually, we put together the Lutoslavsky Paganini variations for two pianos,
oh, nice.
via Zoom, basically, through the semester. So, I mean, I'm sure if you had been in person, it would have been much more satisfying result. But it was really, really rewarding anyway, just to put it together, being in like two continents, you know?
Sure. Um,
Yeah.
some of the pieces that you're working on, like the Scriabin and the Chopin Ballade and everything, they're really technically demanding, in addition to musically demanding, of course. But how do you approach technical difficulties when you come to a passage that just is really, really difficult? How do you go about overcoming that?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, throughout my studies, I guess that I've been kind of building up on different, like it feels like different tools, you know, kind of thing. That is like, okay, so when you have a fast 16 note passages, like you know, you do different rhythms, you know, like you do like accented off beats or something like that, you know. So it's kind of like having so many different teachers to kind of help me get many different perspectives
Hmm.
on issues like that. So for example, the Scriabin sixth sonata has this part in the middle that like the left hand is going like crazy, and these other voices in the right hand are all like superimposed on each other, and that's a challenge, you know. Like you definitely have to break it up like line by line, and like get the fingering right, get the and you apply all of these things to each little layer, you know. Like you practice it in different rhythms,
Mhm.
um, different just different ways, and then until that part is solid, and then you add the next part. And I mean, it's just like a very time consuming process, but once you do it all right, it just kind of comes together, you know. And it's always like issues, you know, like performing live and stuff. Like it's hard to be satisfied 100% with how it comes out, you know. But each time is definitely with experiences like that, you feel like each time it gets easier, you know. Like for example, with the Chopin Ballade, I knew that like 2 years ago I wasn't gonna be able to play it like that, just because I hadn't had like more input from my teachers, and just experience technically, you know. So yeah, I think it's a process, you know. Naturally you have to kind of like step up. You're not just going to pick up a ridiculous piece starting out, you know. It comes naturally if it's done right, and when you get the necessary tools, you can build upon that, and on every different piece differently, but it works the same way.
Yeah, that was a really good suggestion you made just now about playing in different rhythms. It seems a little bit counterintuitive at first, but I've done that as well, like the Chopin, the C sharp minor etude, Opus 10 number 4.
Yeah.
And it's all 16th notes, and so accenting different notes. Can you maybe go a little bit into detail, like how that actually works? Because I think a lot of people could really benefit from that tip.
Sure. So like, let me try it slowly. And my piano is way out of tune. My tuner is coming next week, so excuse me for that. But for example, like you said the C sharp minor, right? So you would do accenting, for example, the fourth 16th note of each group. So you would do like, okay, so it's not as hard on this piano, but or like stopping on the note too.
Yeah.
Right. But then when you do the accents, I think maybe easier on the other one. For example, on the F minor Opus 25, I practice it like.
Oh.
Right. Or and then the other one, so like. You know, and always it must be done like with an accent, but not overly like putting tension in the finger or in the hand, you know, just like do it strong and then release it and then move to the next one. So I had not really been aware of that specific trick until with my teacher, Ron Udidia. We worked on that one, and we worked on the Ocean Etude, and it was like, okay, so like accenting the offbeat 16 notes. And I was like, wow, that really helps kind of like getting that bass technically to later being able to just let it go, you know.
Yeah.
Like, so that was a good one. One more thing I wanted to say about the technically difficult things. I'm still not very much trained by any means in like Taubman approach, but I did take some lessons with one of the guys here in New York City, John Bloomfield, and like just certain little tricks that I had not thought about were really helpful. Like knowing when to go in and out for the black keys, like rotation and different things that like I had heard and like I'm sure I was doing to some degree, but just knowing when to apply it kind of helped me like technically a lot, you know. So I don't know if you know much about the Taubman.
Not a lot. No, my professor uses the Cortot method, and it's all about relaxing and looseness and everything. I'm not really familiar with what you were talking about. I'd like to learn more though.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like other perspective.
Yeah, there's so many different approaches.
Yeah, definitely.
So when you say like going into the black keys, are you talking about like the hand shape, or can you
so
elaborate?
The way they call it, I don't know if you can see from here. Let me see if I can set this up. They call it in and out, right? So it's like you're playing on the white keys, you're like mostly on the edge of the keyboard, not on the edge, but like a little bit farther out. And then when you have to reach a black note, or let me think, what example is good? Yeah, like the C sharp minor etude is a good example because you play the thumb on the black key, right? So if you don't know this little trick, most people tend to kind of stretch the thumb to kind of like get to it a little bit.
Oh, I see.
Right? Yeah. So, and likewise with the pinky, but a little bit less. Yeah. But if instead of reaching right when you want to play the note, you kind of work to it in the previous notes to kind of get there a little bit further in. It just kind of works, and there's like no stretching involved. So that was like a good kind of like aha moment, because you do it and then you don't think about it, and then when you actually say, okay, when do I need to do that, it's kind of like, oh, it's like a little bit easier. But I understand some people don't need any of this. It's like, okay, they're kind of natural, and they just kind of do it naturally. So for me, I had to kind of like break a lot of barriers in my technique that kind of made me go deeper into these things a little bit more.
Those are really good tips. I think a lot of people will benefit from those. So,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. It's just I think with a lot of these pieces, like the C sharp minor etude, it's very demanding, and it can be a little bit daunting. When the rhythm isn't really adding up, like how to actually like with evenness.
Let me be honest. I have not performed that one in public. I've learned it and I played it in juries and stuff like that. But in public, I'm still a little bit taunted, like you said, to perform it like successfully in public. But it'll come the day.
I haven't performed that one either. I'm working on the Rachmaninoff Opus 39 Etude number 1. It's the C minor. It's all the anyway, those tips will really come in handy because that's all about evenness too.
So I forgot. I should mention one more thing. Sorry. I was gonna get to it, and I kind of skipped through it. Another trick that I learned that was really helpful is adding one note by one note. So, like for example, the C sharp minor, you play, and then. And then with each group, like, like adding the next note, and playing from the last ones, that really also helps more than the technically just kind of get that fluidity, So that was really helpful in the Chopin ballad where you said the C sharp minor where it goes, I haven't practiced it, but you know what I'm talking about, that part when the left hand starts to go all chromatic. It was like, okay, so one note and then adding the next one, and then you do this at like a quick tempo, not fast, like quick tempo, just to kind of get that like momentum forward, note by note. So that's really helpful too.
That's a really good suggestion.
Yeah.
Do you have any other suggestions on piano playing, studying music, or any other advice for some of the viewers?
Sure. So in my experience and from what I can see, one of definitely the main thing is wanting to do it. Like you have to wanna play this piece. It's like your commitment and your passion. And in my own experience, like growing up, I was not trained in piano until when I was 12 years old, right? So it's been like kind of like an uphill battle, but just I'm so convinced and passionate about my love for music that you just push through it, So as long as you have that and a good teacher, ideally, I'm sure can make a lot of progress. And also the other thing is just finding the repertoire that you connect with, because some people just get discouraged. I mean, understandably, when you're a beginner, you have to do what they give you, just to get the basic things. But if you just develop that connection and love for the repertoire, then you move along pretty well.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, it's definitely takes a lot of commitment, especially to study it at a university or a conservatory. It takes so Patricio, thank you so much for talking today. We'll look forward to I'll post your website and your recital link and all that.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. And for everyone else, take care, and we'll see you next time.